They treated her like she was trash. They thought she was just a compliant wife, a brilliant mind they could bury under domesticity, and then frame as a criminal when her questions grew too sharp. Charlie Watson and his scheming mother Lana didn't just betray Ellen, they destroyed her. They orchestrated her arrest right at the gates of the mansion she had called home, smirking as the police hauled her away in the snow, convinced they had silenced her forever. But they made one critical error. They underestimated the intellect she had hidden for their sake. They didn't realize that the woman they branded a thief was destined to wield the law like a weapon. When the gavel sounded in that courtroom years later, their confidence crumbled like ice underfoot. The snow was swirling in heavy, relentless flakes, blanketing the wrought iron gates of the Watson estate like a shroud over secrets long buried. It was the kind of biting December chill that seeped into your bones, unforgiving and relentless, much like the betrayal unfolding on that manicured driveway. But the frost in the air paled against the icy disdain radiating from the two figures standing just beyond the threshold, watching with undisguised glee. Ellen Watson stood there, her lavender coat dusted with white, clutching a sheaf of legal documents to her chest as if they were her last lifeline. She was 28, but in that instant she felt timelessly weary. 5 years poured into a marriage that had demanded she dim her light, shelve her law school dreams to prop up Charlie's ambitions. She had reviewed his contracts late into the night, spotting loopholes he missed, all while playing the perfect hostess at Lana's endless galas. Now, those same documents, twisted and forged against her, were the noose around her neck. "Ellen, it's over. Don't embarrass yourself further," Charlie said, his voice smooth and detached, like he was declining a business lunch. He didn't bother hiding his smile, arms crossed over his tailored navy suit, glancing at his watch as if her downfall was just another appointment. Probably already picturing the freedom to chase his latest fling, the intern who'd been helping with his files. A sharp laugh sliced through the flurry from beside him. Lana Watson, bundled in her cream fur coat, gestured dismissively with a gloved hand, her eyes sparkling with triumph she'd savored for months. The older woman's face, usually a mask of polished civility, twisted into something predatory. "Oh, dear Ellen, you were always so useful. But really, did you think you'd ever truly belong here? You were a convenience, a clever little accessory until Charlie needed something more refined." Ellen Watson had always believed that love required subtraction. She met Charlie at a university mixer, him in his crisp button-down, already practicing the confident smile that would later win boardrooms, her in a simple sweater, carrying a stack of case law books she pretended were just for a friend. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who talked about building an empire before he even had a job offer. She was brilliant, top of her class in constitutional law, moot court champion, the one professors whispered would clerk for the Supreme Court someday. But when he looked at her, really looked, he didn't see the accolades. He saw someone steady, someone who could listen. And Ellen, who had grown up in a house where voices overlapped and no one ever truly heard her, mistook being listened to for being loved. So she subtracted. First went the late-night study groups, then the judicial clerkship applications. She told herself it was temporary. He needed her help navigating his first finance job, decoding contracts, spotting risks in deals that could have sunk him early. She stayed up after he fell asleep, red-penning his proposals, turning his rough ideas into airtight pitches. When he landed the promotion, he toasted teamwork. But the team was mostly her, working in silence. Charlie's mother, Lana, arrived soon after the wedding, moving into the east wing of the house they bought with Ellen's trust fund, down payment, money from her grandmother, meant for law school tuition that Ellen quietly redirected. Lana appraised Ellen the way one might a new appliance, useful if kept in its place. "You're so practical, dear," Lana would say, handing Ellen lists of gala seating charts or charity auction items to organize. "Charlie needs someone grounded. All that creativity of his, it runs wild without structure." Ellen smiled, nodded, subtracted again. She stopped correcting people when they assumed she was just a homemaker. She let Charlie take credit for the legal loopholes she found in his company's tax filings. She hosted dinners where investors praised his genius while she refilled wine glasses, the conversation flowing around her like water around a stone. But stones over time wear smooth, they don't disappear. She kept one small habit, a private rebellion. Late at night, after the house slept, she read law journals on her tablet under the covers. She followed cases, annotated opinions, traced the paths of judges whose names now adorned federal benches. It was her tether to the woman she'd been before love asked her to fold herself smaller and smaller. Charlie never noticed the tablet's glow. He was too busy rising. New office, bigger deals, magazine profiles calling him the next generation of Wall Street visionaries. In photos, Ellen stood slightly behind him, smiling just enough, the perfect accessory. Lana often stood on his other side, her hand possessively on his arm, as if Ellen were merely borrowed scenery. "You're lucky," friends told her. "He's going places, and you get to go with him." Ellen would laugh softly, the sound practiced and light. Inside, she felt the slow erosion of something vital. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet ache, the sense that she was becoming a ghost in her own life. The first time Charlie mentioned streamlining the household finances, she didn't think much of it. He'd always handled the accounts, but now he wanted her to sign new documents, powers of attorney, access to offshore holdings she'd never known existed. "It's just for efficiency," he said, kissing her forehead. "You trust me, don't you?" She did. That was the problem. She signed where he pointed, her pen moving across pages she barely skimmed. She was tired that night. Another gala, another round of smiling while Lana critiqued her dress choice. She told herself she'd review them later. There was always later. Later never came. Instead came the slow realization, pieced together from overheard phone calls and odd bank statements. Money moving in patterns that didn't match the life they lived. Investments she hadn't known about. Signatures that looked like hers but weren't quite right. When she finally asked, gently, always gently, Charlie's smile tightened. "You're tired," he said. "You're seeing things that aren't there. Let me handle it." Lana's eyes narrowed over breakfast the next morning. "A wife should support her husband," she said coolly, "not question him." Ellen retreated, subtracted the questions, subtracted the doubt. She didn't yet know that the perfect scapegoat isn't created through force. It's created through trust. And she had given them everything they needed. The first discrepancy appeared on a rainy Tuesday in October, buried in a bank statement that Charlie had left unfolded on the kitchen island. Ellen noticed it while wiping down the marble counters, her nightly ritual after the staff went home. A transfer of $250,000 to an account in the Caymans, labeled only with a string of numbers. She paused, rag in hand, staring at the line item. It wasn't one of theirs. Not the joint checking, not the savings, not the trust. She knew every account by heart. She'd balanced them meticulously for years. She told herself it was probably a new investment vehicle. Charlie had been talking about diversifying. Still, something tugged at her, the way the date aligned with a board meeting he'd come home from, flushed and triumphant. That night she waited until he was in the shower, steam fogging the bedroom mirrors, before she opened his laptop. The password was still her birthday. He'd never bothered to change it. She felt a small, guilty thrill as the screen unlocked, followed immediately by shame. She wasn't snooping. She was verifying, but verification turned into discovery. Folder within folder, encrypted files she cracked with the same pattern he used for everything. Lana's maiden name plus the year they married. Inside, spreadsheets mirroring their household expenses but routed through shell companies. Signatures scanned and layered. Hers, lifted from old tax returns and superimposed onto authorization forms she'd never seen. Transfers timed to coincide with her solo trips to visit her ailing father, when no one would notice her absence from the city. Her breath grew shallow as she pieced it together. Embezzlement disguised as legitimate offshore holdings. Millions siphoned from Charlie's firm, funneled through accounts bearing her name alone. If audited, every arrow would point directly to her. She closed the laptop with trembling fingers and sat in the dark until Charlie emerged, towel around his waist, humming. "Everything okay?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "Fine," she whispered. "Just tired." She didn't sleep. The next morning, Lana joined them for breakfast unannounced, as she often did when she sensed turbulence. She watched Ellen over the rim of her porcelain cup. "You look pale, dear. Are you coming down with something?" Ellen forced a smile. "Maybe." Charlie barely glanced up from his phone. She's been working too hard on the charity auction. Lana's eyes lingered. Perhaps she needs a break from all that responsibility. 2 weeks later, the forged documents began arriving in Ellen's personal email, backdated approvals, digital signatures that looked flawless to the untrained eye. Each one implicated her further. She forwarded none of them, deleted most, but screenshots lived now on a hidden drive only she knew about. Evidence, she told herself, just in case. She started asking questions, carefully. At dinner one night, "Charlie, did we open a new account in the Caymans? I saw something odd on the statement." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What statement?" "The one on the island. The transfer." He laughed, but it came a beat too late. "You're misreading it. It's a holding company for the Vineyard investment. I'll have accounting send you the prospectus." The prospectus never came. Instead, Lana began dropping hints at luncheons. "Poor Charlie," she'd sigh to her friends within Ellen's earshot. "So much pressure at the firm. Audits are brutal these days. One wonders who one can really trust with the finances." Ellen felt the net tightening, invisible threads drawing closer. She printed everything she could, stored copies in a safe deposit box under her maiden name. She stopped signing anything Charlie slid across the breakfast table for convenience. His smiles grew thinner, Lana's visits more frequent. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Ellen had quietly refused to co-sign a new power of attorney, Charlie followed her into the library. "You're being paranoid," he said, voice low. "If you keep pushing, people will think you have something to hide." "I do have something to hide," she replied, meeting his eyes for the first time in months. "My intelligence, apparently." His face hardened. "Don't make this difficult, Ellen. We're a team. But teams don't forge each other's signatures." The final piece clicked into place when she found the draft press release saved on the shared drive, dated for the following month, announcing an internal investigation into financial irregularities and the immediate suspension of one Ellen Watson, spouse of Executive Charles Watson, pending federal review. They weren't just protecting themselves, they were preparing to sacrifice her completely. That night, she lay beside Charlie, listening to him breathe evenly in sleep, and understood with cold clarity the crime had already been committed. She just hadn't known she was the one who would pay for it. The snow started just as the police cruiser pulled up, fat flakes drifting lazily at first, then thickening into a relentless veil that turned the world monochrome. Ellen had been in the foyer, slipping on her lavender coat for a quick errand to the post office. Nothing more. She heard the gates buzz open, the crunch of tires on fresh gravel, and assumed it was a delivery. When she stepped outside, 2 officers were already walking up the driveway, flanked by Charlie and Lana, who stood just inside the threshold like sentinels guarding their victory. "Ellen Watson?" the older officer asked, his voice flat, official. She nodded, confused. The stack of legal documents she'd printed weeks ago still clutched against her chest. Her private insurance policy, now absurdly out of place. "Yes, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." The words blurred into a distant hum. Handcuffs clicked cold around her wrists before she could process them. The metal bit into her skin, sharp and real. She stumbled slightly as they turned her towards the cruiser, and that was when she saw their faces clearly. Charlie stood with his arms folded, the same navy suit from the Hook photo now dusted with snow, his mouth curved in a small, satisfied smile. Not triumphant, not cruel, just relieved, like a man who'd finally closed a troublesome deal. He didn't move to help her, didn't speak, just watched. Beside him, Lana lifted one gloved hand in a delicate wave, as if bidding farewell to a guest who'd overstayed. Her cream fur coat gleamed against the white, and her laugh, light, tinkling, utterly delighted, carried across the driveway. "Goodbye, dear," she called, loud enough for the officers to hear. "Do try to behave in there." Neighbors' curtains twitched. A phone appeared in a window across the street, recording. Ellen felt the burn of eyes on her skin, hotter than the December air. She had hosted those neighbors, poured them wine, listened to their vacation stories while smiling in this very spot. Now she was spectacle. Criminal. The wife who stole from her own husband. "Please," she whispered to Charlie, as the officer guided her past. "Tell them it's a mistake." He met her gaze for the first time, and there was nothing in his eyes. No regret, no love, just cool assessment. You brought this on yourself, Ellen? All those questions. You should have left it alone. The officer opened the cruiser door. Ellen's knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the frame. Snowflakes melted on her cheeks, indistinguishable from tears she refused to let fall. She glanced back once more. Lana was already turning away, linking her arm through Charlie's, pulling him inside where it was warm. The heavy front door closed with a soft, final thud. As the car pulled through the gates, Ellen saw the wrought iron swing shut behind her, locking with a metallic clang that echoed in her chest. The mansion shrank in the rear window, lights glowing golden through the falling snow, as if nothing had happened, as if she had never belonged there at all. The cruiser rolled down the tree-lined street, past manicured hedges now dusted white, past the life she'd built one quiet sacrifice at a time. She sat in the back, wrists cuffed, documents crumpled against her coat, staring at her reflection in the partition, pale, stunned, utterly alone. They had won, for now. If the sting of betrayal cut you as deeply as it did Ellen, and you're already rooting for her to rise from this humiliation, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like if you've ever been underestimated. Comment, "Justice for Ellen," if you're ready to see them face her in court, and turn on notifications, because the comeback starts soon and you won't want to miss a single moment of her quiet, devastating triumph. See you in the next chapter. The holding cell smelled of bleach and despair, a concrete box where time stretched like taffy, pulling Ellen into loops of disbelief. She sat on the thin cot. The crumpled legal documents from her arrest now confiscated as evidence. Ironic, since they were the only proof she had of her innocence. The cuffs had been removed, but the red welts on her wrists itched like accusations. Bail hearing was tomorrow, they said. Until then, she was just another number in the system. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she traced patterns on the wall with her fingertip, old habit from law school exam cramming, mapping arguments in the air. If A implies B, and B contradicts C. But her mind kept circling back to Charlie's face at the gates, that detached smile. How long had he been planning this? How many times had he kissed her goodnight while sharpening the blade? Morning came with fluorescent hum and a public defender who looked like he'd slept in his suit. "Strong case against you," he muttered, flipping through a file that wasn't hers. "Offshore accounts in your name. Signatures match. Your husband's testimony seals it." He glanced up. "Any family to post bail?" She thought of Lana's wave, Charlie's silence. No. The hearing was a blur of wooden benches and echoing voices. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, eyed Ellen like a puzzle she didn't care to solve. Bail denied. Flight risk, given the international elements. The gavel cracked, and Ellen was led away, the courtroom door swinging shut on the free world. Back in the cell, a guard shoved a plastic tray through the slot, grey slop masquerading as oatmeal. She poked at it, appetite gone, when the buzzer sounded. Visitor, Charlie. Alone, for once. He looked almost uncomfortable in the sterile visiting room, his suit too sharp against the scuffed linoleum table. No Lana this time. Perhaps she deemed the optics too messy. "Ellen," he started, voice pitched low, as if they were negotiating a merger. "This is unfortunate." She stared at him across the plexiglass divider, the phone receiver heavy in her hand. "Unfortunate. You had me arrested, Charlie, at our home, in front of everyone." He shifted, glancing at the guard posted nearby. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. The firm pushed for charges, internal audit, you know how it is. But we can fix this. I'll hire the best lawyers. Just sign the papers." She leaned forward. "What papers?" He slid an envelope under the partition slot, thick and official. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Divorce petition, grounds, irreconcilable differences, assets to him, the house, the cars, the life she'd helped build. Alimony? A lump sum insultingly modest. And a clause, non-disclosure about the marriage, the finances. Silence in exchange for scraps. "You're divorcing me," she said flatly, "while I'm in here. It's for the best." His eyes flicked to the envelope, avoiding hers. "For both of us. The scandal, it's already everywhere. Tabloids, social feeds, Wall Street wife's downfall. Lana thinks, we think, starting fresh is cleaner. You get out, move on. No ties. No ties." as if their vows were post-its, peelable when inconvenient. She remembered the night he'd proposed, on the balcony of that tiny apartment, promising forever. She'd subtracted her dreams for that promise. Now he was subtracting her entirely. Why? The word escaped, rawer than she intended. He sighed, the sound practiced. You changed, Ellen. All those questions about the accounts. It made things tense. If you'd just trusted me, trusted you? Laughter bubbled up, bitter and unfamiliar. You forged my name on fraud. You let them cuff me like a thief. His jaw tightened. I didn't let them. The evidence was planted by you. She pushed the envelope back. I won't sign. The guard tapped his watch. Time up. Charlie stood, straightening his tie. You'll have to, eventually. The lawyers are filing anyway. Contested divorce just drags it out, for you. He paused at the door, almost gentle. Take the deal, Ellen. It's mercy. Mercy. The word lingered as he walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. She sat there long after the buzzer reset, the envelope mocking her from the table. That afternoon, a new guard delivered mail, the formal filing notice, stamped and irrevocable, served in absentia. Charlie Watson versus Ellen Watson. Respondent, presumed guilty until proven otherwise. Friends stopped calling after the first week. Too awkward, too risky. The few who did whispered about what really happened, their voices laced with pity or doubt. Lana's social circle closed ranks. Invitations Ellen once fielded now went to Charlie's new consultant, a woman half her age with a laugh like wind chimes. In the quiet of lockdown, Ellen felt herself erasing, not just from their lives, from her own. The mirror in the bathroom showed a stranger, hollow cheeks, shadowed eyes. Who was she without the mansion, the role, the subtraction? A criminal, the headlines screamed. A fool, the silence echoed. But fools don't map escapes in their heads, and criminals don't memorize precedents on smuggled legal pads. She tore the divorce papers into precise quarters, flushing them piece by piece. Let him contest that. The erasure was mutual, but hers wouldn't be permanent. The trial came and went like a storm that leaves the landscape scarred but strangely clean. Ellen pleaded guilty to reduced charges, wire fraud only, no laundering, on the advice of a court-appointed attorney who promised a lighter sentence in exchange for cooperation she never gave. The prosecutor painted her as the mastermind. Charlie testified with polished remorse, eyes moist as he spoke of his devastating betrayal by the woman he'd loved. Lana sat in the front row, dabbing at dry cheeks with a lace handkerchief. The judge, tired, overworked, sentenced her to 4 years in a minimum security federal facility upstate. Ellen stood straight as the words fell, feeling the last threads of her old life snap one by one. Inside Alderson, time moved differently. No marble counters to wipe, no galas to orchestrate, no Charlie to dim herself for. Just routine, lights at 6, count at 9, silence in between. She requested the law library within her first week. The guard raised an eyebrow, but stamped the form. Most new ones want the gym, he said. Ellen only smiled, small and private. The library was a narrow trailer behind the chapel, shelves crammed with outdated reporters and dog-eared study aids. She started with the basics she already knew by heart, then moved to gaps she'd never filled. Advanced evidence, sentencing guidelines, judicial ethics. She read until her eyes burned, took notes in neat block letters on contraband legal pads smuggled from education classes. When books ran out, she requested interlibrary loans, quietly, persistently, until the clerk stopped rolling her eyes. She earned her paralegal certification in 18 months, then enrolled in a correspondence program for a master's in criminal justice. Essays mailed out, graded, returned with red ink she studied like scripture. She tutored other women, tax fraud, drug possession, identity theft, mapping their appeals with the same precision she once used on Charlie's contracts. They called her professor behind her back, then to her face. She never corrected them. Discipline became her architecture. Wake at 5, exercise in the yard until the frost melted off the grass, library until lockdown. No commissary candy. No television dramas. She saved every dollar from her prison job folding laundry, funneling it into a barred account that grew slowly, steadily. Letters from the outside dwindled to nothing. Her father had passed the year before sentencing, and old friends had chosen sides. Silence suited her. It left room for thought. She practiced restraint the way others practiced anger. When a new inmate bragged about framing her ex, Ellen listened without judgment, then quietly corrected the woman's understanding of chain of custody rules. When guards taunted her about white-collar princesses, she met their eyes, calm, until they looked away first. Rage would have been easy. Restraint was power. Parole came after 3 years for good behavior. She walked out in March, sky the color of washed steel, carrying one plastic bag of belongings and a folder thick with certificates. No one waited at the gate. She took a bus south, then another east, until the landscape flattened into unfamiliar fields. A halfway house in a town whose name no one back home would recognize. A job at a legal aid clinic for $20 an hour. A studio apartment with a hot plate and one window facing brick. She changed her last name back to her maiden, legally, quietly, becoming Ellen Harlow again, a woman who had never stood in snow being handcuffed. She studied for the bar in the evenings, flashcards spread across a card table, passed on the first try, took pro bono cases no one else wanted, battered women, over-sentenced juveniles, immigrants tangled in red tape, one more than she lost. Judges began to nod at her in hallways, remembering the diligent attorney who never raised her voice. Years accumulated like pages turned in silence. She moved to a larger city, accepted a clerkship with a federal magistrate known for mentoring the overlooked, published articles in obscure law reviews, measured incisive pieces on prosecutorial overreach and financial crime attribution. Her name appeared in footnotes, then in nomination packets. Senators' staffers called. Background checks turned up the old conviction. She never hid it, explained it calmly in interviews. I was scapegoated. The record speaks for itself. It did. Expungement came at year 7. Confirmation hearings at year 9. Through it all, she watched Charlie and Lana from a distance. No social media, no tabloids, just public records and the occasional news blurb. His firm thrived, then faltered under new scrutiny. Her name faded from their story. They became the brilliant duo unburdened by scandal. She let them believe it. Restraint, she learned, was not absence of feeling. It was precision, timing. The difference between striking too soon and striking exactly when the blade would cut deepest. In the quiet of her new chambers, still empty, waiting for the official swearing in, she sometimes touched the folded newspaper clipping she kept in a locked drawer. The photo from that snowy day, her face blurred, Charlie and Lana sharp in the background. She no longer felt the old ache when she looked at it, only clarity. The years of silence had not erased her. They had forged her. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late autumn, unassuming white envelope amid the usual stack of briefs and Bar Association newsletters. Ellen slit it open at her kitchen table, coffee cooling beside her, expecting another routine confirmation hearing reminder. Instead, the presidential seal stared back at her from heavy cream stock. She read the first line twice. The president intends to nominate Ellen Marie Harlow to the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The words blurred, then sharpened. Her pulse remained steady. Years of discipline had trained it that way. But something deeper shifted, like tectonic plates, settling into a new alignment. She set the letter down carefully, as if it might bruise, and walked to the window overlooking the narrow street below. Leaves skittered along the sidewalk in a chill wind. 10 years since the snow at the gates. 10 years since the cuffs, the cell, the erasure. She had rebuilt in measured layers. Clerkship, publications, quiet victories in courtrooms where no one knew her married name. She had become the attorney judges consulted off record, the one whose briefs were passed around like contraband wisdom. And still, she had never allowed herself to imagine this. The phone began to ring. First, her clerkship mentor, voice thick with pride. Then a senator's aide, brisk and congratulatory. Then reporters, polite but hungry. She let most go to voicemail. When the New York Times called, she answered only to confirm receipt, nothing more. Restraint, always. Background checks followed, thorough and unforgiving. Investigators pored over her prison record, the expungement, the pro bono hours that outnumbered billables 3 to 1. They interviewed former inmates she'd helped appeal sentences, guards who remembered the woman who never complained, colleagues who spoke of her as scary smart, but fair. Charlie's name surfaced once or twice, old scandal clippings, but the trail led nowhere useful. He had moved on, remarried briefly, divorced again. Lana still summered in the Hamptons. Their lives had continued glossy and loud. Ellen's had continued quieter, deeper. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing was scheduled for January. She prepared the way she prepared everything, meticulously, without flourish. She rehearsed answers in the mirror until they sounded like conversation, not defense. When senators asked about her conviction, she did not flinch. "I was wrongfully targeted in a financial investigation," she said evenly. "The charges were reduced, the record later expunged. I have spent the intervening years ensuring no one in my courtroom faces the same presumption without evidence." The chairman nodded slowly. No one pressed further. Confirmation came on a grey afternoon in early spring. 68. 32, broader than expected. She watched the roll call on C-SPAN from her office, alone, hands folded in her lap. When her name was read as confirmed, she allowed herself one slow exhale. Investiture was set for June in the ceremonial courtroom at 500 Pearl Street, the same building where, years earlier, she had stood in an orange jumpsuit awaiting transport. The irony was not lost on her, but she mentioned it to no one. Invitations went out sparingly. A few mentors, the legal aid director who had hired her fresh from parole, 2 women she tutored in prison now free and thriving. No family remained. No old friends from the mansion days. She did not check the society pages to see if Charlie or Lana had been notified. Public record made that unnecessary. The night before the ceremony, she walked the courthouse halls after hours, heels echoing on marble. She paused outside the courtroom where her sentencing had occurred. Door locked now, lights dim. She placed her palm flat against the wood for a moment, feeling nothing dramatic. No surge of vengeance, no tears. Only the quiet recognition that the building had held her at her lowest and would soon hold her at her highest. The symmetry felt earned, not gifted. On the morning of, she dressed in simple black robes tailored to fit, hair pulled back severely. She entered the packed courtroom last, as protocol demanded, and took her seat on the bench for the first time. The chief judge administered the oath. Her voice did not waver as she promised to uphold the Constitution. When it ended and the applause rose, she remained seated a moment longer, letting the sound wash over her without changing her expression. Then she rose, nodded once in acknowledgement, and stepped down. Later, in chambers, an aide handed her the first case assignments. At the top of the stack, a complex financial fraud docket, high profile, involving offshore accounts and forged signatures. Defendants, executives at a firm recently acquired by Watson Holdings. She traced the familiar corporate name with one fingertip, face impassive. The appointment was official. The reckoning, she knew, was only beginning. The case appeared on her docket like any other. United States v. Charles R. Watson and Lana M. Watson. Charges of securities fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction stemming from a decade-old scheme now unraveled by a whistleblower at the restructured firm. Ellen read the assignment notice in chambers, expression unchanging, and initialed the routing slip without comment. Her clerk glanced up, curious at the defendants' names, but said nothing. Discretion had always been one of her requirements. Pre-trial motions dragged through autumn. Defense counsel, expensive, aggressive, filed the usual barrage: venue change, suppression, severance. She denied most, granted a few, her orders concise and unassailable. The names Watson appeared only as text on screens and pages. She never spoke them aloud. The morning of jury selection arrived cold and bright, winter threatening again. Ellen entered the robing room early, slipped into the black silk with the same calm she had worn for years. She paused at the mirror only long enough to ensure the collar lay flat. No hesitation. No tremor. In the courtroom, the gallery filled slowly. Reporters, curious attorneys, a few former colleagues of Charlie's who still believed in his innocence. The defendants arrived last. Charlie first, grayer at the temples, suit still impeccably cut, scanning the room with the old proprietary confidence. Lana beside him, thinner now, fur replaced by severe Chanel, eyes sharp as ever. They took their places at the defense table without looking toward the bench. All rise. The bailiff's voice carried the familiar command. Chairs scraped. The room stood. Ellen entered from the side door, robes whispering against the carpet, and ascended the 3 steps to the bench. She did not hurry. She took her seat, arranged the case file precisely, then lifted her gaze. Charlie noticed first. His head turned toward the bench in idle curiosity, expecting the usual elderly appointee or political favor. Recognition hit him like a physical blow, shoulders stiffening, mouth parting slightly, color draining beneath the courtroom lights. He stared, unblinking, as if waiting for the illusion to dissolve. Lana followed his line of sight a moment later. Her gloved hand tightened on the table's edge. The malice that had once glittered so freely faltered, replaced by something colder. Disbelief, then calculation, then the slow dawn of comprehension. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but no sound escaped. Ellen let the silence stretch just long enough for the room to feel it. Be seated. The command was quiet, steady, carrying the weight of absolute authority. The gallery obeyed. Charlie sank into his chair as though his knees had given way. Lana remained standing a fraction longer, eyes locked on the woman she had once waved goodbye to in the snow. Ellen met her gaze without warmth or triumph, only the impartial distance the robe demanded. "Good morning, counsel," she continued, voice even. "This is the matter of United States versus Watson and Watson. We are here for jury selection. Mr. Harlan, when you're ready." The lead prosecutor rose, clearing his throat, glancing uncertainly between the bench and the defense table. Defense counsel, 3 attorneys in escalating tiers of billing rates, whispered urgently to their clients. Charlie leaned forward, murmuring something frantic. Lana shook her head once, sharply. One of the younger defense lawyers stood. "Your Honor, if it please the court, we request a brief recess to consult with our clients." Ellen regarded him for a measured beat. "Request denied. We have a veneer panel waiting. Proceed." The lawyer hesitated, then sat. Charlie's face had gone from pale to flushed, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Lana's composure cracked further. Her fingers drummed silently on the polished wood, the same gesture she once used when displeased with seating arrangements at charity galas. Throughout the morning, voir dire unfolded with mechanical precision. Ellen's questions to prospective jurors were incisive, fair, impossible to appeal. Whenever her voice filled the room, Charlie flinched as though struck. Lana stared fixedly at the bench, searching for weakness, finding none. At the first break, defense counsel approached sidebar in a cluster, voices low and urgent. "Your Honor, we must raise a concern of appearance of impropriety. There is a prior connection between the defendants and—" Ellen cut him off gently but firmly. "The court is aware of its ethical obligations. Recusal motions, if any, should have been filed weeks ago. We will proceed." They had no grounds. She had disclosed nothing that required it. The old marriage license bore a name long legally shed. The conviction expunged. On paper, she was simply the assigned judge. When proceedings resumed, Charlie could no longer look at her. He kept his eyes on the table, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched. Lana, however, stared openly now, defiant, almost pleading, as if will alone could undo the decade between them. Ellen felt none of it. Not satisfaction, not vengeance, only the cool clarity of a scale finally balanced. They had recognized her. Too late. The trial unfolded over 3 weeks in the hush of winter, the courtroom windows rhymed with frost each morning. Ellen presided with the same measured cadence she had honed for years, rulings delivered quietly, objections sustained or overruled without inflection. Reporters filled the back rows, drawn by the spectacle of a once prominent finance family on trial. But they found little drama in her demeanor. No theatrics, no lingering glances at the defense table. Only the law, applied with surgical care. The prosecution's case was methodical, almost elegant. A former CFO turned whistleblower after a conscience attack during cancer treatment laid out the architecture of the fraud. Shell companies nested like Russian dolls. Transfers timed to quarterly filings, signatures digitized and layered with chilling precision. Bank records projected on the screen showed the same patterns Ellen had glimpsed a decade earlier, patterns she had once questioned and been silenced for. When the forged documents were introduced, her old signatures lifted and reused, Charlie stared at the exhibits as though they were foreign objects. Lana's fingers stilled on her notepad. Neither looked toward the bench. Cross-examination was brutal but fair. Defense counsel tried to paint the whistleblower as bitter, the records as ambiguous. Ellen allowed latitude, then reined it in when it veered into speculation. "Stick to the evidence, counselor," she said once, voice low, and the attorney sat without protest. The most damaging testimony came mid-trial. A forensic accountant who had reconstructed the digital trail. She displayed side-by-side comparisons, Ellen's genuine signatures from legitimate joint filings versus the altered versions on the fraudulent transfers. The differences were microscopic to the untrained eye, but under magnification, undeniable. The accountant's conclusion was delivered without flourish. The defendant, Charles Watson's workstation, was the origin point for the alterations. The metadata is conclusive. Charlie's head bowed slightly. Lana's eyes closed for the first time. Ellen admitted every exhibit. No commentary. No visible reaction. The defense case rested largely on character. Colleagues praising Charlie's innovation. Society matrons attesting to Lana's charitable devotion. They called no experts to rebut the forensics. When Charlie took the stand, his voice, once so smooth in boardrooms, cracked on the simplest questions. He denied knowledge of the shells, blamed rogue employees long since departed. He could not explain the metadata. On cross, the prosecutor asked softly, "Mr. Watson, did you ever report these alleged rogue actions to authorities?" Charlie hesitated. "It was internal. And yet you allowed your then-wife to be prosecuted for similar transactions." "Objection," defense counsel called, but the word lacked force. "Sustained," Ellen said calmly. "Jury will disregard the reference to prior proceedings." But the seed was planted. Jurors' eyes flicked toward her, then away. Lana testified last. She was composed at first, recounting her role as family advisor, claiming only peripheral awareness. Under cross, her poise frayed. When shown emails she had authored, sharp directives about cleaning the books before the divorce finalizes, her answers grew clipped. "Taken out of context," she repeated, until the phrase sounded hollow even to her. Closing arguments came on a Friday, snow again falling thick beyond the tall windows. The prosecutor spoke of greed disguised as ambition. Defense counsel pleaded for reasonable doubt, voice rising in practiced indignation. Ellen's charge to the jury was textbook, clear, impartial, exhaustive on burden of proof. She watched them file out, without expression. Deliberations lasted less than 2 days. When the foreman rose on Monday morning, the courtroom held its breath. On count 1, securities fraud, guilty. Each count followed the same. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Charlie's shoulders folded inward. Lana stared straight ahead, face carved from stone, but her hands trembled in her lap. Polling the jury, Ellen's voice remained even as each juror confirmed the verdict. She thanked them, dismissed them, then turned to sentencing. "I have reviewed the presentence reports, the victim impact statements, and the letters submitted on behalf of the defendants." Her tone carried no satisfaction, no mercy, only the weight of consequence. The scheme was sophisticated, sustained, and designed to shift blame onto an innocent party while enriching yourselves. The obstruction was deliberate. She detailed the guidelines, the enhancements for leadership role, the lack of remorse, then the sentence. 12 years for Charlie, 8 for Lana, fines that would hollow what remained of their fortune, restitution to the defrauded investors. Charlie made a small sound, half protest, half sob, as the marshals approached. Lana finally looked up, eyes meeting Ellen's across the room. There was no plea in them now, only the stark recognition of reversal. The woman she had dismissed as disposable now held the full apparatus of justice in her hands and wielded it without flourish. Ellen nodded once to the marshals. They led the defendants away. The gavel fell, soft but final. Courtroom spectators exhaled. Reporters scrambled for phones. Ellen gathered her files, rose and exited through the side door. In chambers, she removed the robe, hung it carefully, and stood at the window watching snow settle over the city. Power had reversed, yes, but the judgment had been delivered without emotion, clean, precise, inevitable, just as she had promised herself it would be. The appeals were exhaustive as expected. High-priced firms filed thick briefs alleging bias, procedural errors, even vague claims of judicial vindictiveness. Ellen read each one in chambers, annotating margins with the same dispassionate precision she applied to every case. The circuit court affirmed in a terse per curiam opinion, no reversible error, sentence reasonable. Certiorari was denied without comment. The judgment stood. Charlie was transferred to a medium security facility in Pennsylvania, far from the city lights he had chased. Reports filtered back through public records and quiet inquiries, assets frozen, properties auctioned, the Hamptons' house sold at a loss to cover restitution. His second marriage had dissolved before trial. The third never materialized. Visitors grew scarce, letters went unanswered. Lana fared little better. At 78, the court recommended a low-security camp, but health complications, heart palpitations, onset arthritis, landed her in a medical unit. The fur coats and gala invitations became memory. Her name vanished from charity boards. Old allies cited restructuring when asked. She spent days in communal rooms, watching television with strangers, the volume too low to drown out the silence of her diminished world. Ellen followed none of it closely. She did not subscribe to society pages or prison gossip. Her docket remained full. Civil rights cases, corporate malfeasance, the steady rhythm of federal justice. Colleagues noted her consistency, rulings sharp, demeanor serene, never a hint of personal animus. Young clerks asked, wide-eyed, about the Watson trial. She answered only what the record showed, then redirected them to the next brief. One spring afternoon, a year after sentencing, she walked the courthouse plaza during recess. Cherry blossoms drifted across the stone, pale against the gray sky. A reporter lingered near the steps, notebook in hand, hoping for a quote on a different case. He recognized her, hesitated, then approached. "Judge Harlow, any comment on the Watson appeals being exhausted?" She paused, coat collar turned up against the breeze. The appellate process served its purpose. Justice was done. He pressed gently. Some say it felt personal. Her gaze was steady, almost kind. The evidence was personal to the victims. My role was to ensure the law applied equally. Nothing more. He had no follow-up. She nodded once and continued down the steps. That evening, in her apartment overlooking the river, she prepared tea the way she always had. Precise measure, steep 4 minutes, no sugar. The newspaper lay folded on the counter, a small item on the inside pages. Charles Watson denied early release. Lana Watson transferred to home confinement, pending health review. She read it without lingering, then set it aside. She had not attended their sentencings for theater. She had not watched their downfall for satisfaction. The courtroom had been the only place where truth could be compelled, where lies dismantled under oath carried weight. Beyond those doors, consequences unfolded without her hand. Change had come to her years earlier, in the quiet of prison libraries and halfway houses, in the slow forging of restraint into authority. The woman who emerged had not needed their collapse to validate her rise. Their ruin was simply the law's echo, delayed but accurate. She stood at the window, watching lights flicker on across the water. Somewhere out there, Charlie stared at cinder-block walls. Lana counted days in a monitored apartment stripped of ornament. Their empire, built on subtraction and scapegoating, had subtracted itself to nothing. Ellen felt no triumph. No bitterness remained to release. Only the quiet certainty of a life reclaimed, not through rage, but through patience so absolute it had become power. She turned off the lamp, leaving the city glow to outline the room. Tomorrow's docket waited. New cases, new injustices to weigh. She would meet them as she met every morning, unchanged, unhurried, the scale in her hand steady. They had framed the wife, they had watched her fall, and in the end, it was their own weight that broke them. She slept soundly,